Hey folks, welcome back. We are taking a look at the last 3 steps of the survey research process. So we have looked at the determining the information needs, and then we talked about the design of the survey design, and then the questionnaire design, and that should take up about 2/3 of your time in total with those 3. Then we go out and we actually collect the data. We bring in all the data, put it into the computer, and then we analyze the data, we process it, and then we write up a report. So I'm not going to say much about the last 2, but I do want to spend some time just going over a little bit here in terms of data collection. I'm also going to add a lab video, which I'll talk about on a particular page here, about cleaning up the data and so on and checking for errors. But step number 4 here then is on data collection. And so there's 3 main methods here of collecting data from respondents. There's face-to-face interviews, there's telephone interviews, and then there's self-completed questionnaires. So those are, down below I've got those as mail interviews, but that could be email, or it could be an electronic form, or it could be snail mail. And so let's take a look then at each of those then. When deciding upon the method here, you've got to take a look at the costs and the time availability and so on like that, accessibility of the population, all that kind of stuff here. And I'm going to give you an exercise, and you'll see it actually in the list of activities here about here's some different kinds of surveys that we want to collect data from. And so what would be the sample design and the data collection method in each case? So you'll see that a little bit later here. But let's take a look at some of these things down here. And we're going to talk about the cost, the time, and the response rate of these various ones here. Now, by mail, I'm talking about the various forms here. So that's self-completed. And so that isn't necessarily snail mail. That can be electronic, or it could be a, say, a Google form or something like that, or SurveyMonkey, so an electronic survey. Let's take a look at each of these then, and we're going to take a look then at the cost of actually collecting the data. And what I'd like you to do is, in each case, I want you to put down for each line going across, which one do you think is the highest cost in this case, which is the lowest, and which is the medium. And then I'd like you to do that for the time it takes to collect the data, which is the fastest, which is the slowest, which one is medium. And then finally, the response rate. And the response rate then is, if we went out to, say, 100 people face-to-face, how many would we tend to get back, or how many people would complete the survey, versus if we were to do this by phone, or versus we were to send it out by mail. So which is the, I guess in this case, the highest response rate? And I'm not looking for a particular number or anything, just which is the highest, which is the lowest, which is the medium. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you to stop the video at this point and just take a moment out and go across each line, putting in high, medium, low, or fast, medium, slow, and then we'll take them up. Okay, I'm going to assume that you have done that. And so let's take a look then at each of these. The highest cost here tends to be face-to-face. The lowest is mail, and medium is telephone. Why? Well, let's start with the lowest cost. The mail survey, and so that's the self-completed survey, and that is the least costliest because you aren't actually there as a surveyor. And so what you do is you send them out by mail. And stamps don't cost a whole lot. Or, even less, if it's electronic, you send it to a distribution list. And so everybody's got an electronic copy, and you ask them to fill it out and send it back. Or even better, you send them a link to an electronic survey. Maybe it's a Google Docs or Google Forms, pardon me, or SurveyMonkey or something like that. And they fill it out electronically, and the cost is virtually zero to do that. So that's very, very low cost. Self-completed would also mean if you had a collection of surveys that you left at the desk or you handed out to people. That's kind of a combination between face-to-face and mail, but it's actually self-completed. So you're giving them the survey and then asking them when they're finished it to drop it in this particular box here at the front. So that's self-completed. That's still fairly low cost because it's just the cost of actually printing the paper. The highest one is face-to-face because you're actually paying the interviewer to go out there and actually collect the data. Now I know as students you're doing this for free and so on, so that may not enter in, but normally it costs money, of course, to hire people to go out and go to a particular location and grab people off the street or wherever it is in the lobby of the Centrium and to ask them the questions face to face. So that takes a lot of time, that takes a lot of money. Medium is telephone because you still have people that you're paying to do that, but telephone interviewing tends to go fairly quickly. So often you have an automated robot system which actually will ask the first couple questions, are you interested in this? And then if they're interested, then you might come on as a live person and go through the survey with them. If you don't have that sophisticated technique, you're still going down through a list here and phoning people up. You'll probably get a lot more rejections and so on than if you were face-to-face, but it doesn't take long to actually go through until you find somebody. So that's the first one. Time to collect the data. Now, the slowest here is mail. The fastest is telephone, and face-to-face is the middle one. Now, it really depends actually on the type of survey that you've got here, in terms of telephone and face-to-face here. But the reason why mail is so slow is because you got to give people time to actually get the thing and then give them some time to complete it. Maybe it's a week or 2 weeks or something like that, and then send it back because they're doing it on their own time, and you need to give them, a good week or so to do that. So it takes a while to collect that data. And so if you are doing that, if you're doing an electronic collection of the surveys, then make sure that you give them a good week to 10 days or so to complete the thing. In terms of telephone, that tends to be fairly quick in terms of collecting the data. One of the reasons for that is that usually when we're doing a telephone survey, we tend to make sure that the questions are fairly short and succinct so that people can easily answer them over the phone. With face-to-face, you've got you're seeing people face-to-face. You can actually show them the survey and say, here, read this question or take a look at this particular list here and check off. You can have more in-depth questions and so on, and so that tends to be a little more medium. These two are actually fairly close in terms of that. It's just that telephone can go quicker in terms of this. The problem with telephone is you got a lot more people hanging up on you, and so it can take a while actually to get people. In terms of your response rate, your highest is actually with face-to-face, And that is because it's harder for people to not do the survey when you're confronting them face to face. It's just harder to turn away from a person. So somebody comes up to you and says, "Hey, would you got 5 minutes that I could just ask you a few questions? I'm a business student, blah, blah, blah," that kind of stuff. And they're more apt to say, "Yeah, that's okay." Um, Medium tends to be telephone. It's a lot easier to hang up on somebody when you're not actually looking at them in the face, and or to say, "No, I'm busy right now." Mail it's pretty easy to just simply ignore the thing, right? You're not accountable to anybody in this for most of these kind of surveys here, and so you just simply, "Yeah, I'm not doing that," and you toss it in the garbage. That's why with mail, I mean, the response rate for a general interest survey tends to be in the 5 to 15% range. If you get 25% response rate for a mail survey, you're doing pretty good. And so that is a big problem with self-completed surveys is the non-response bias that we have here. Face to face, if you can't actually go out and talk to people, um, go to their business, or if you're that, which obviously it takes a lot of time and money, then they're less likely to turn you away if you're actually standing before them in their office or in their place of business, or even at the Centrium if you're in the lobby. It's better response rate than if you were to phone people. Okay, so that is some things to keep in mind on that. All right, then we collect the data and then we process the data. So this is the fifth step here. Um, excuse me. This actually is really what the guts of the course is about here. So the next unit is taking a look at unit I, and then A, and then T, and then C, and S, and then M, and those are all talking about data processing and the analyses that we're going to be using in terms of that. Before we get there, we do want to talk a little bit about the coding of the data and so on like that. It's important to keep in mind here that there's three kinds of variables. There's nominal variables, ordinal variables, and interval variables. Nominal variables are variables where they're categories. So they're represented by names. They could be represented by numbers, but the numbers don't mean anything, just really category 1, category 2, category 3, right? So they can be gender, male, female, other, could be the city that you live in, Red Deer, Calgary, Edmonton, that kind of thing. It could be what area of the city that you live in, what quadrant, or even what neighborhood you live in, Eastview, Pines, Vanier, etc. And so those are nominal. We can do the least statistically with nominal data. All you can do is you can count them up and you can come up with percentages and so on. Ordinal data are ranked data or rated data. And so when you have a 5-point Likert scale, how satisfied are you with the services of our servers at the restaurant on a 5-point scale? Very dissatisfied, dissatisfied, neutral, satisfied, very satisfied. That is a 5-point Likert scale. We assign numbers to them, 1 to 5, and we can calculate medians and stuff. We can't calculate means and standard deviations because we actually don't know the distances or differences between a 2 and a 3. Is that the same as between a 3 and a 4? And is your 3 the same as my 3? And so there's some stuff that we can do, but it is weaker than the last category, which is interval data. And this is the greatest number or types of variables that we deal with in stats. And so that is numbers there where we know the distance between each number. Age, height, IQ, marks on an exam, number of times that you go to the gym in the week, okay, number of days between dates and things like that. So that is interval data. Ratio data is something which some people call that a fourth class. Here it's actually just part of a larger category called interval data here. Ratio data just means that 0 is where you start. So if you're talking age, it means that you start at 0 with a person's age, and then you go up from there. And what that means then is that you can actually calculate ratios. Somebody who is 40 is twice as old as somebody who is 20, right? But that doesn't work with all interval scales. It's if you take a look, for instance, at temperature scales, then 0 degrees isn't the starting point. You can actually have negative temperature, negative numbers, which we tend to have this time of year. And so it can be minus 40 out there. What that means is you can't calculate ratios. You can't say that when it's minus 30 out there that it's twice as hot as it is when it's, if it's plus 30, it's not twice as hot as when it's 15. Okay? You can do that with a Kelvin scale because it starts at 0. All right, we'll typically be dealing with ratio data, but we just call it all interval data. Data coding is something that's important, how you code your data in your questionnaire. I'm actually going to take a look here at, in a separate video, on the Business 111 personal data. That comes from this questionnaire here, which is right there on page D24. So this is the actual data that I collected, and maybe a good starting point for you would be to take a look here and say, take a look at some possible data errors in the entry. Okay? And I'm going to actually do a separate video on that. It'll be a lab video on how to clean up the data and how to code your data and all that kind of stuff. So that'll be useful. So I won't talk about that here. What I would like you to do, though, is the second question here is take a look at what's wrong with this data set. And this is a different data set here, so it gives you the background, survey on the use of the Calgary Public Library. This is, I think this is fictitious, pardon me. And so a sample of 1,000 individuals was originally selected. Telephone interviews were carried out. And after 2 follow-ups of non-respondents, 570 interviews was finally obtained. I'm not sure if this was a real one or not. It's not one that I've done. But anyways, public library. And this is how they coded the data. And then here's the first few rows here then. And what I'd like you to do is to go through here and see, is there any problems with this data? Any error or any interesting combinations which kind of jump out at you? So we'll take this up in class. I'll leave that for homework there. Then we get into the actual data analysis. And that is really what the guts of this course is about. So all I've got is a paragraph, but that's going to expand into weeks and weeks and weeks of really cool statistical tests. And then finally, we've got the report generation, and that's really that's really in your project, and it's the parts of the project that you want to take a look at. So just read through this page here and so on, and the different parts that we have here. So that brings us to the end of this unit, because what we're going to do next in class is to take a look at these 4 surveys actually, and just tear them apart and look at them and so on. So we'll take these up in class, but I'd like you to go through and find out what is wrong with these. How would you clean up the questions, clean up the whole survey? And we'll do each of these. Okay? So that takes us to the end. That there is no additional problems in this particular unit here. So the next one we'll look at is population variance. And that's because this is a non-numerical unit. And so that will end Unit D, except for the lab video, which I told you I'll be doing about cleaning up the data, as well as we'll do a number of in-class exercises and going through some stuff here in Unit D. Thanks for tuning in.